What is your go-to quick gut-friendly breakfast when you're short on time?
Greek yogurt, mixed in some flax seeds, berries, and mixed nuts. Go. Done.
Great. It sounds like what you had this morning as well.
Yeah.
Okay, true or false? One bad meal can wreck your gut health.
False.
What is the biggest myth around gut health that drives you mad?
That you have to take probiotics, that you have to have expensive supplements, an expensive microbiome test. Absolutely not needed.
Okay. I can sense that there's probably a few myths. And what is one gut health habit that you rarely, if ever, skip, no matter what?
Focus on fibre.
Okay. What is one food that you would never want to give up for your gut health?
Beans. Love them. Big fan.
A big fan. Is leaky gut a real thing?
I think it's been miscommunicated in that it does. The science is there to support some of it, but it's been made and pathologized into something else.
Okay, interesting. We're going to get to that, I'm sure. And last of all, can the menopause negatively affect my gut?
Yes and no.
Interesting. All right. We've got a lot of things to go through today. Maybe I thought to myself, maybe we should start at a bit of a higher level, because I am guilty of this as well. I throw around the words gut health quite loosely, just kind of assuming that people know what I talk about, what I'm referring to. So why don't we start by imagining you're in the pub or some other gut-friendly environment, and you're explaining to someone what you mean when you say the words gut health.
Yeah, so I think I really start with saying, what is the gut? And I think most of us, when we think about the gut, we point to our stomachs and we say, this is our belly. And actually the gut is starting in our mouth and going all the way down to our bum. So it's that whole digestive tract. So really we're thinking about the health of that entire process. But now, more commonly, we're actually referring to the health of your gut microbiome. Okay. So this living, thriving community of tiny living organisms called microbes that live in your lower intestines. That's towards the end of your digestive tract. And we want them to be kind of thriving. We want them to be making these special molecules for our health. And it's these molecules that are particularly important, because they are helping to support the health of your gut, but they're also traveling across the lining of your gut into your bloodstream and supporting your organs and body systems too.
Okay. And so just so we get our terminology right, because I'm sure we're going to be referring to this throughout the episode, we're referring to microbes as bacteria, but also viruses, nematodes, fungi. I'm guessing those are all part of this rich ecosystem in our large intestine.
Yeah, so predominantly in a large intestine, we have about 100 trillion microbes. So within these microbes, we have bacteria, we have fungi, we have viruses, we have archaea. We actually tend to talk mostly about bacteria because they're the ones that we know a lot more about. Okay. And really the evidence around viruses, for example, is only just beginning, and it's a very exciting, different field. So that's really what we're talking about. And I think it's worth remembering that this 100 trillion microbes, that is as many microbes as there are stars in the Milky Way galaxy. And everybody has a very individual gut microbiome. It's as unique to them as a fingerprint. So it's this kind of new, kind of forgotten organ that we haven't previously known about, because it's really only in the last 20 years that we've been able to research it and understand that it's there and how influential it is for our health.
And so we have these microbes, and then you mentioned special molecules that they produce. What do we refer to those molecules as, and what are some examples of them?
So the technical term is metabolites. Okay. I often just talk about them as just molecules, because I think sometimes it can just be like too many terms being flown around. Sure. But within those, there's a particular group called short chain fatty acids, and these are the ones that are very potent for your health. Your body can't make them itself. It needs your microbes to be able to make them. And these are really produced by your microbes, your bacteria, feeding on fibre from the foods that you eat. That then helps them to make these special molecules, these metabolites, these short chain fatty acids, which have an anti-inflammatory effect. and they travel across your body, and they're also really important for your brain health as well. We're seeing that they support your blood-brain barrier, which is this fortress around your brain that basically acts like gateways, letting the helpful nutrients in and keeping the harmful ones out.
Mm-hmm. And not to take us down too much of a meandering path here, but if short-chain fatty acids are so important for us, if I consume some of these metabolites, like, I don't know, butyrate, let's say, that I'm now seeing sort of being added to drinks and potions, is that going to have the same benefits as if it's almost like I'm going straight to the source? I'm like, okay, well, these microbes produce butyrate, so I'm going to consume some butyrate and I'm going to have hopefully the same desired anti-inflammatory effect or the brain boosting effect or whatever they might be.
So the research is really new around this, and these what they're called postbiotics. And it makes intuitive sense, right? That if you're eating these short chain fatty acids, that's kind of skipping a step and they're going to have a health effect. We're not quite seeing that translating, and it might be because the fact that the gut is a really kind of long, pipe before it even gets to your gut microbes, or even be absorbed in your small intestine or your large intestine. And this is probably because they've got to get past your stomach, which is a swirling sac of acid. And I talk a little bit like it's a little bit like Indiana Jones having to kind of make his way across all these different obstacle courses. It's very like that for the food that we eat, which is great because it keeps the bad things out by killing them. But it also makes it quite difficult sometimes when we're ingesting things to not always have the same effect. But I think we'll have more research in this area. I think it's going to be quite interesting to keep an eye on. Yeah,
definitely. I often think that there's a reason why evolution has designed this pathway for us. And I think any shortcut always comes with a trade-off. And I'm not too sure what that trade-off is at this point, but I'm always a little bit skeptical. And that's why I personally have like a food-focused approach.
There's no such thing as a silver bullet.
And
actually, it's the simple things that make the biggest difference that maybe don't seem that sexy. Having, a balanced diet, focusing on fibre, getting a variety of different plants in.
At the start of your book, Genius Gut, which I love, you've got this sort of really insightful gut health quiz, and it sort of gives folks an insight into what the health status of their gut is. I wonder if you can walk us through that. And perhaps is there someone listening to this and they're thinking, well, I don't really know if my gut health is optimum or not. Should I do a gut health test? Isn't that like something that will give me some sort of idea as to what's going on with my gut in the context of like whether a quiz can do the same thing?
Yeah, so I think what I really wanted to do with the quiz was show how much our body is telling us about our health already. And a really, really easy, simple way of checking our gut health is by just looking into the toilet bowl and looking at your poo. So I talk about poo. I don't think we should be talking about stools and bowel movements and getting kind of stressed about it. Like poo is poo.
Poo is poo. Okay.
Poo is poo.
Yeah.
And there's a few things that you want to be looking at. You want to be looking at that shape of the poo, which is ideally, and I still need to find a term that isn't food related for this. You're looking for a sausage that's smooth sausage or a sausage with cracks in it. Maybe we can brainstorm one later.
Okay.
You're looking for how often are you having it? So anything from 3 times a day to 3 times a week is considered healthy. Now that's quite a range.
That's
I think
a real big
people
range.
Find that kind of a bit confusing, but that's just to show that we are all slightly different and you can be healthy within that. You're also looking at the color of the poo. So it wants to be a dark brown. If you are getting red or black, that could be likely a sign that there's some blood in the poo, and that might be something that you want to go and check with your doctor just to see that there's not something more sinister going on. Then you're looking at, are you having any uncomfortable digestive symptoms with that? Is there discomfort when you go to the bathroom? Are you struggling to get everything completely out? Is there any pain? So really those things collectively all together are showing you kind of how healthy your gut is.
Yeah. And when I hear this, and it might be a key for some of our listeners to think about poo, but within my culture, so I'm from an Indian background, we talk about poo all the time. And this is something that's been normalized from childhood. It's just, how's your poos? Are you poos around? And later on, I kind of felt the embarrassment and shame when I went to school. And there wasn't near the same sort of like ease around talking about toilet habits. But this is something that I think you're championing, right? Through obviously the quiz, but just normalizing the conversation around poo.
Yeah, absolutely. Everyone does it. Kim Kardashian does it, you know. It's just something that I think we just need to be okay and talking about, particularly where it's such an easy thing to keep an eye on with our health. I talk about pee as well as being a really great way of checking your hydration levels.
Let's talk about that actually.
Yeah, we could talk.
What color should my pee be?
Yeah, so you want it to be like that homemade lemonade color, so that kind of slightly pale lemony tinge, that it's see-through, but you still got a kind of slight hint of color, but it's translucent obviously. And then a sign that it's perhaps you need to be drinking more when it's concentrated apple juice. So I think the thing is that while drinking 8 glasses of water a day is a really helpful measure, it's effectively a myth. And actually your hydration levels do change day to day. It can depend on how much salt you've eaten, how much exercise you've done, how hot the environment is. Maybe you're on holiday in Costa Rica and you need to drink some more water. So yes, aim for 8 glasses of water a day, but do just check in with your body and just use that as kind of a really easy reference point for how much you need to be drinking.
I want to come back to pee in a second. I just want to highlight something you mentioned around the 3 per week versus 3 per day, all of which can be normal. How does one recognize whether that is normal or whether they're constipated? Is it with the constellation of other symptoms associated with their bowel habit frequency?
Yeah, so you want to be really thinking about all those 4 things that we talked about. So the shape, the form, the color, and also how comfortable you feel in going to the bathroom, how quickly it's coming out, the kind of lack of pain. So if you are going over 3 times a week, then that is likely a sign that you're constipated. But even if you have a change within, say you're somebody who goes 3 times a day and then it slows down, that could be a sign that something's going on with your gut because it's a change from your normal. So I think that's also something to like really be aware of, that if you're having a big change from what's normal for you for probably longer than 3 weeks, that might be something where like, oh, maybe I'll go and look into that, even though it technically comes within that range that's healthy.
Within your normal habit, so let's say you go usually once a day, and you start going twice a day, for a week, and then another week it goes down to, okay, well, I'm only going 3 times a week now. So there is this sort of inherent fluctuation in your bowel frequency. It's not really the same, and this is a new thing. What are the things that can speed up the frequency and reduce the frequency, generally speaking?
Yeah, so I think a lot of it comes down to diet, but also stress, because we have this big connection between our gut and our brain. And I think anyone will recognize within themselves, or perhaps know someone that if they're in like an exam environment, or maybe they have to do a stressful presentation at work, that will then make them perhaps need to run to the bathroom. And that can go either way for someone with stress. It can be that they need to just straight away go and like got a really fast, maybe got diarrhea or something, or it's just kind of happening really quickly. But it can also go the other way and be constipation. So stress is a big thing. Diet's another one. So diet, obviously what we eat changes every single day. And fibre is something that we really want to be thinking about when we're thinking about how quickly or slowly our poo is kind of passing through. Fibre acts like your kind of optimal timekeeper. It helps to make sure that things aren't going too fast, but it also helps to make things aren't going too slow. So it could be that having kind of changes in your diet, perhaps you're having a kind of higher fibre one day, and then a lower fibre another day. Other things like coffee, alcohol can also make food go through much quicker as well. And that's also can be quite individual and also depend on how much coffee and alcohol you've drunk.
Just a quick one. If you want to learn the 5 ingredients that I think are fantastic for inflammation that you should be getting into your diet every week, then download this PDF right now. It's in the link down there, and I'll send you my 5 ingredients for inflammation. Generally speaking, should people be going to the bathroom for their poo? I was going to say number 2 there, but for their poo in the morning, or the evening, or does it not really sort of seem to matter?
It doesn't matter. I think the only time where it might be a concern is if you're having to wake up in the night and go, and there could be something perhaps going on there and it'd be worth checking out, especially as well that, maybe there's nothing sinister going on, but it's also disrupting your sleep.
Okay. So in the context of a week, there's so many things that are changing. You get stress, let's say Monday to Friday, you're stressed at work. You may have a different bowel habit. You're going to be eating differently if you're commuting into work. You might not have the opportunity to have your lovely flaxseed berry breakfast or snacks during the day. And your activity levels are going to be different as well. That's going to affect your hydration status. So all of these things, all of these inputs are going to be having an impact on when you poo, how often you poo, the type of poo that you have. And so how do we even know what's normal? I think it really comes down to being intuitive, or as intuitive as possible.
Yeah, I think, if you're within that range, and obviously I think when I'm talking about like a deviation, it's quite an extreme deviation. It's not just like, having maybe going twice one day or just maybe skipping. So I think just want to kind of be clear on that. It's like if you have, something where you're like, this is very different from my normal. But your body will fluctuate. This is what's so fantastic about our bodies, is that they're able to kind of be in tune with the balance of and the rhythm of what's happening in our lives, and to kind of just fluctuate according to that as well.
Yeah. I've always thought it's a bit odd that when we are stressed, we go to the bathroom. Because from an evolutionary perspective, if you are stressed because you're faced with a predator or whatever it might be, the last thing you want to be doing is going to the bathroom, right?
I think my theory is that, we know there's something called, so you have your two modes. You've got rest and digest, and then you have this kind of fight or flight syndrome. So this is kind of going back to being a caveman and thinking, oh my God, there's a tiger behind me, I need to move really quickly. And what we think from that with stress is that your digestion is not a priority in that point. Your priority is moving your muscles so that you can run away. And so perhaps as part of that is just everything just needs to just drop out. It's going to make you lighter. There's no kind of energy or attention going to kind of holding that in. Everything's going a little bit wonky. So I don't know, maybe in the past there was a few accidents and that was just, going to make you run faster. But now it's like, oh God, got to make it to the loo, quick dash.
Do you think people should be tracking their poo? Do you think there's any benefit in doing like a 7-day or a 14-day, or just generally keeping an eye on how many poos you're having?
Yeah, I think we should always be looking in the loo. Like, why not? It takes 2 seconds, less than that. Like, that's just a nice, really easy health check. Look at your poo, look at your pee. And, if you want to track it, if you're making a change, for example, that could be something that could be interesting. But I don't think you have to be fastidious about it. If that works within and something you want to do, maybe track it for a week or two, kind of see what's happening, check in with your body and think, okay, this is what my normal is. But I think really just looking in every single day or whenever you're going, it's just such an automatic thing we should all be doing.
I'm just thinking from the perspective of someone who is intrigued by doing a gut health test, right? One that you buy online, all the various brands out there. If someone is interested in knowing the state of the gut, maybe the first point of call should just be doing a stool tracking exercise where they record the shape, the frequency over a 30-day period and try and connect the dots between, I was stressed that day, or that day I didn't go to the gym, or I had 2 cups of coffee instead of 4 cups of coffee. Just again, like bringing that intuition to the forefront so they begin to understand about how much flux there is in their diet week to week and how that is reflected in their bowel behavior.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, tying it into that bigger piece of how do you feel? What's your energy? What's your mood? What have you eaten that day? And actually kind of, I think connecting those pieces of puzzle of actually this is all connected and this is all related. How comfortable am I feeling? And yeah, I think it's, we don't have to be like really, worried if there's perhaps, a day or two that isn't so great. It's really about the big picture and the kind of most days. And I think something I really want to highlight is that, with bloating, I think we've got really kind of overly anxious about what bloating means, that any sign of bloating is a problem. Whereas actually a little bit of bloating in that hour after the meal is totally normal. And actually, if you've had a high fiber meal, that's a sign of very happy gut microbes. They're having a party, they're having a fiesta in there. They're feeding on that fiber. They're making those special molecules for our health, those short chain fatty acids. And as a side effect, they're producing gas. So that's something that actually, if that's happening, a little bit after a meal, that's fine. The problem is if that bloating isn't going down at all over the day and you're feeling incredibly uncomfortable with that. But the benefit is that there's lots of things we can do with diet and lifestyle to help manage that. And if you're not seeing any relief from doing changes, then definitely go and see your dietitian and, get some personalized advice.
Okay, so just to reiterate that, because I'm glad we're talking about bloating, it's one of the commonest reasons I feel from my own clinical practice, but also from just speaking to our community as to why people fear increasing fiber in their diet, either from the anxiety around bloating or having had experience of this in the past. So bloating is normal after consuming food, particularly those that are high in fiber. When does it become a problem? Just reiterate what you said there.
So if you're bloated consistently throughout the day, so it's not easing and not going down, and you're feeling incredibly uncomfortable with that, and it feels perhaps excessive, any of those things, your body is telling you, and you know your body. So I think that's something to then be like, actually, can I get some advice on how to manage that?
Are we talking 60 minutes, 120 minutes after eating? There are particular time sort of guides or?
Yeah, so usually I'd say like within that hour after eating, it's totally normal to feel bloated, but it's not going to be one of those things that you can just like click your fingers and, boom, it's gone. It'll probably just slowly dissipate. And then you want to see that, as your food, because your food's digesting, your food is still staying in there. It doesn't just kind of disappear. So that process is still happening. So it won't perhaps mean that you go back to kind of a perfectly flat stomach, but it should, within that hour, like really start to kind of ease off mostly.
Okay. If people are struggling with lentils and beans that cause bloating, perhaps we could talk specifically about the ingredients within lentils and beans that may cause those troublesome symptoms. And what are some ways in which we can ease that bloating side effect if it becomes troublesome, so it going on for longer or becoming uncomfortable?
Yeah, so some people really do find that if they have beans or lentils that they find it quite difficult to, digest, having some discomfort and that bloating, as you say. And that might likely be because they're sensitive to a kind of fermentable sugar. So there's a group of them called FODMAPs. And so beans tend to be like a really rich source of this. And actually, like, there's nothing inherently problematic in these, FODMAPs, because these fermentable sugars are actually really great for your gut microbiome in terms of feeding them. What might happen for these group of people is that actually just too much gas is produced, or there's just incredible sensitivity in the kind of lining of your gut that's then shooting signals back saying, oh, whoa, what's going on? So what I say, if someone's struggling with beans and lentils, I always say, like, start slow and start low. Take a small amount, slowly increase it up, but really listen to your body, because that's going to be very individual from one person to another. It could be that you're just starting with, a tablespoon of beans in a day and just seeing how that goes. There are some tips and tricks to make it a little bit easier for yourself. So things like getting canned beans, for example, or beans in a tin. That process tends to break down some of those fermentable sugars. So actually, by having those rather than making them yourselves, maybe you're already doing that because it's less, stressful. But you can also then rinse them. So I would recommend then rinsing the canned beans and the tin beans, because again, there's some kind of those fermentable sugars are still on, those fermentable carbohydrates are still on the outside of the bean. So that'll make it a little bit easier.
It's so annoying, right? Because I love using the liquor that the beans have been stewing in, because it's thick and it makes a lovely curry sauce and stuff. But I have noticed my wife complaining when I do that, because it does cause a bit of bloating for her, actually. Sorry not to call you out, Rochelle. But it's one of those things that's like a trade-off, right? So you lose the sort of like lovely, thick viscosity of the sauce for a reduction in the fermentable sugars that can cause issues.
Yeah, I think it's just playing with what works for you and what feels great. And, you know, as you say, your wife has a different experience to what you were having, and just finding that happy compromise.
Yeah. As an exercise for the book that I've just written that's coming out in March, we have a section on gut health. And the whole premise of the book is protein, not just high protein for high protein's sake. It's all about looking after your gut and looking after inflammation levels. And one of the exercises we did was to look at the prebiotic fibers in different fruits, vegetables, beans, and legumes. It's so hard to find the raw data on specific sugars in different lentils and legumes. And so I'd love to be sort of a bit more prescriptive about which beans and lentils you should try first. Obviously rinsing them, and perhaps even added some spices to help with bloating. But the reality is I haven't come across that much data. And so I think your suggestion of just doing a tablespoon and seeing how you feel in part of your like daily diet and then titrating upwards is probably a pragmatic exercise.
And I think you're so right on that lack of data. And I think so Monash University in Australia are doing a lot of work in that area. And that's really informed their FODMAP app. That's really useful tool for people with IBS. King's College London also have a version as well. And I think that's something that's, you know, quite difficult with the nutrition databases that we have. You know, a lot of them, you know, only describe, you know, a kind of a range of 60 to 120 nutrients and bioactive compounds. Yeah. And we just really want to get kind of more of those, that data of that breakdown of those fiber types of those FODMAPs. So that work is happening, but, you know, it's obviously then making sure that, you know, other researchers are accessing that as well.
It's funny, right? Because I see a bit of a vacuum of information within the clinical world and the research world, but simultaneously you have big companies, particularly those in the States, that are marketing de-bloat tablets to everyone, but I think primarily women, just looking at the marketing sort of graphics and messaging and all that kind of stuff, as something to take with meals to prevent bloating. And clearly bloating is an issue for a lot of people, and it's not always dietary as well. I always say that like bloating can be a symptom of, and it can be a red flag symptom. So always get it checked if it's a new symptom with your primary care physician. But what do you make of some of these tablets or supplements that are being marketed as de-bloat to take after or with meals?
Yeah, I think there's a difference between perhaps getting advice from a doctor or a dietitian who's saying, I recognize that you've got issues, you know, let's talk this through. Let's see what strategies there are to tackle this. As you say, it's not always diet related. And then perhaps, you know, if there's certain recommendations that need to be made within that, to, you know, companies making any woman feel, and it is, as you rightly say, that having anything but a flat stomach is not normal. I think that can be quite problematic, and it kind of means that, you know, people are taking stuff unnecessarily. We don't know, you know, perhaps it's kind of, you know, likely completely harmless. But I think it's something that, you know, we've got to be kind of careful about how are these things communicated, and, you know, is it really that we need to be taking them? Yeah.
I want to go back to pee. The 8 glasses of water, where did that even come from?
I think there was a number of studies that looked, or like 1 or 2 studies that looked at kind of the kind of milliliters kind of equivalent roughly. But yeah, no one's actually, it's a little bit like the 10,000 steps. Okay, it's kind of just become a thing. But obviously it's important it's a really nice, easy way to say, okay, I've drunk 8 glasses. But I think it's just, you know, equally, you know, to check in with your body. I think there's so much that we like outsource to other things when our body is actually telling us a lot itself.
Okay. So straw colored homemade lemonade. You have a thing about using diet and food and drink to describe bowel-related stuff. So, toilet-related stuff. So, straw-colored homemade lemonade, and drink as much water as you need to sort of consistently hit that color.
And I think a key thing, in the morning, for example, you've not drunk any water overnight. And, something as simple as having, 2 glasses of water in the morning. There was a kind of nice, small randomized control trial that looked at giving people different quantities of water.
Okay.
Having 1 glass helped to improve their energy. They had a better mood. 2 glasses also helped them perform better on cognitive tests. Their memory got better.
Interesting.
1 glass wasn't half a glass wasn't quite enough. And obviously not having any water, they were a bit more grumpy and tired. So for me, that's like something that's really simple that we can all be doing. It's free, just go to the tap. Those are the changes that are really making a difference for our health. It's like hydration, it's the simple foundations of our diet. Like it doesn't have to be something like having the latest kind of crazy expensive supplement or whatever else is going on.
So 2 glasses in the morning. I know with the caveat that was a small RCT, but I'm really interested in this kind of stuff because I've always been of the opinion that the first thing we should be doing when we wake up is rehydrating after a prolonged fast and like dehydration process. Do you remember how many milliliters that was, that 2 glasses?
500
mils. Okay, great. So I have a liter in the morning. So I don't know. I know the study, I went beyond the boundaries of the study, but I personally have a liter. I think that like keeps me regular. It definitely helps wake me up. And I actually kind of delay my coffee because I don't want something that's literally dehydrating me when I'm trying to rehydrate. So I actually delay my coffee for that reason as well. What about salts and stuff? Because electrolyte replacements have become super popular online. And I personally use an electrolyte replacement when I train. So when I'm doing endurance, cardio, cycling, that kind of stuff. But are there any benefits to rehydration with salts?
So for the everyday person, no, we don't need to be doing it. Okay. Like, if you're doing extreme exercise, if you're working out, if you sweat heavily when you're doing yoga, like maybe, and it's been a really hot day and you haven't drunk that much, that's probably something that definitely, why not? But I think at the same time, you can be getting those electrolytes from the food that you're eating. So, you can get potassium from banana. We get many of these electrolytes are already naturally present in our everyday food. So I think it's something that, if you are really wanting to fine tune your workout or you're in a very extreme athlete, then that could be like a kind of nice add-in. But for everybody else, no, absolutely don't need to worry about it.
Okay, great. Because I tend to have like fruits and vegetables, and I always think about them through the perspective of those incidental electrolytes and minerals that we're getting, magnesium and salt and all the rest of it. And so that's really well explained in terms of how we would get some of these minerals and vitamins and rehydration elements alongside just ensuring that you're hydrating yourself properly. So not a fan of that, I'm guessing. Any other things in the morning that you're not a fan of, like green drinks or lemon or that kind of stuff?
I think it's, for me, it's about making sure that you're having breakfast. And I know there's kind of some
having breakfast. Interesting. Okay, yeah.
I think breakfast has, it's been a kind of contentious point, but I definitely think from looking at the evidence, there's a number of reasons, very strong reasons why I think we should be having breakfast. One of the main ones is if we think back to our gut microbiome and gut health, that our gut microbes' favorite fuel is fibre. And, really thinking about the context that in the UK, 90% of us are not reaching our recommended 30 grams of fibre a day.
Gosh, okay.
And then within that, on average in the UK, we're only getting 20 grams out of that 30 grams a day. So that's a deficit of about 35 to 40%. So we've got this kind of big fibre gap happening. What we see with the people who don't have breakfast is that they have a lower fibre intake And they also have less nutrients, micronutrients of certain key micronutrients. And this is from key surveys in the UK, in Australia, in the US, and in Mexico as well. So this is something where I think if we're looking at our gut microbes, we've already got a fiber deficit happening. Missing that breakfast is such a key opportunity to be getting fiber in there for our gut microbes. So that's something that I think, it can be like a really easy, simple thing for us to be doing to look after our gut health, and really like thinking about what are the things we could be having for breakfast that are going to help us feel great. I love thinking about rye pumpernickel bread, which is 7 grams per slice of fiber. So, already really making a massive fiber boost there. Say you were to add, some avocado and some eggs with that, you're getting protein, you're getting extra fiber from the avocado. Half an avocado is about kind of 3 to 4 grams. You've then already got your 10 grams of fiber in one meal.
Yeah.
Add in some nuts and seeds, sprinkle kind of mixed seeds on top, extra fiber. So that's just a really great way to start fueling your day. And also I really talk about health in the perspective of health being not just about preventing disease later down the line. Of course, that's really important, but health being really about how you feel right now, being really important, because all those days that you are experiencing day after day after day, they are a piece of a puzzle that fit together to make the picture of your life. And actually, it's about having those pieces of puzzle where you feel great, you feel energized throughout your life. And that's what nutrition can also do for you.
So am I right in thinking that from the breakfast perspective, and the reason why you're not a fan of skipping breakfast, it's because it's harder to hit that daily quota of 30 grams if you've only got 2 meals further down the line? Is that one of the
absolutely.
reasons?
But I think also, I kind of put out this question where, why is it that we're so insistent that children go to school and have breakfast before they go to school? We are dogmatic about it. Yet all of a sudden we click our fingers at, you hit adulthood and you go and do a real job, oh, no, breakfast, we don't need to be having that. I think, of course, within that, I'm always like, there is individual variability, and really it's about being in tune with what works for you. And I would never say that anything is a rule. Yeah. For me, it's like, but I think it's being open-minded and exploring these things. And I think, a lot of people say that they don't feel hungry in the morning. And that can almost be a very trained response. If we're shutting down hunger signals, our body then learns to not listen to them.
Gotcha.
So again, it's like, is that something that's true, or is that the fact that you haven't been kind of intuitive to what's happening in your body, and then you've kind of lost and forgotten that signal? If you do want to try, I do suggest, you can start with something really small in the morning. Maybe it's just even kind of kicking off your day with a banana or like a small yogurt or whatever you feel like. Give yourself some time, again, do that tracking we talked about if you want to. Change one thing, see what happens. Do you feel different 4 weeks down the line? 8 weeks?
I fluctuate, in all honesty, as to some days I do skip breakfast, but I'm a fiber guy, so I'm always like having tons of fiber and high protein plant-based foods in my diet. So I definitely don't fit that criteria of under consuming fiber. And I definitely see the benefits for certain adults, particularly if they are struggling with overconsumption of energy in their 24 hours a day. So as a means to reduce excess fat, I can see why breakfast skipping has become popular, with the caveat that we have to also be maintaining our fiber intake for all the benefits that we're going to go into a bit later. And I guess for kids, because they're so energy dependent and they need a higher calorie and protein intake in general, sending our kids to school without breakfast would be pretty sacrilegious from that. So that's the kind of pushback that I would imagine people might be saying with regards to skipping breakfast or not skipping breakfast.
Yeah. I think I think we've looked at stuff a little bit through the lens of that everything is about just the calories. And I think this is where the contention has come with talking about breakfast, because it's always centered simply on weight. And I think, that's, totally see a valid point kind of talking about calories. But actually, health is so much more about that. And I think when the fact that most, we're really struggling to get our fruits and vegetables, we're struggling to get fiber, we're struggling to give our body the foods it needs to thrive, thinking solely about calories in the terms of I'm just going to restrict and cut out a meal, when actually we could flip it and say, can actually we have breakfast, but just make it really nutrient dense, which then inherently is lower calorie anyway. So really thinking about the types of food that we're having rather than just like, I'm going to completely cut that out. Again, it's, what works for you. Maybe somebody finds that easier if they are wanting to lose weight. They're like, actually, this is what works for me. Absolutely, find what suits you, find your thing. And then just try and like really work around that to still have those principles of, can I focus on getting those plants in? Can I think about whole grains? Can I get my fruits and vegetables in?
Is there any evidence that too much fiber can actually be detrimental?
So there are some studies that, for example, for some people with constipation, that having too much fiber can be problematic. So this is a very kind of a subset of people in constipation. So again, I think that just really ties really nicely in that narrative of, there are no rules, find what works for you. And perhaps that maybe kind of eases your symptoms. For other people, generally, we know that fiber is just so important. Like we have big kind of large epidemiological studies that show kind of strong links with lower risk of heart disease, lower risk of type 2 diabetes, lower risk of colorectal cancer, even, associated with, lower risk of depression, something as small as adding 5 grams of fiber a day. So that is the same as a third of a can of beans, or maybe it's like 2 squares of dark chocolate and a piece of fruit. So for every 5 grams of fiber you add is linked to a 5% lower risk of depression. And I think the key thing about fiber is that it's really about the foods that they're in, right? It's because those foods that fiber is containing are naturally kind of very densely packed with other nutrients that you need for your health. So by increasing your fiber intake, you're likely meeting many other nutritional needs without even needing to think about it.
Yeah.
And I think I really like the message of, let's be adding things in, let's, enjoy things. And then that may naturally displace some of the stuff that's less healthy, but we don't need to be dogmatic or kind of stressed about enjoying a slice of cake. We all do it. We all like it.
I definitely do that. What are some of the unusual high fiber foods that you've come across during your research? You mentioned one of them, avocado, which I was quite interested in. Because I think of avocado, I'm like, oh, it's just mainly fat, but there's some fiber in it.
Yep. So one whole avocado is about kind of 7-8 grams of fiber.
That's great.
So rye pumpernickel bread is something I'm always a huge fan of, being just, just so easy to know, just one slice, 7 grams, done. Something like dark chocolate, if a 100-gram bar, not that you would maybe want to eat 100 grams in one sitting, but that's about 11 grams.
I feel like I'm being called out.
Or maybe you want to, like 85% dark chocolate, that's about 11 grams. I think I talk a lot about what I call the BGBGs. So I think you talk about BGs.
We talk about BBGs. And you're talking about BGBGs. It's all the same thing. It's just a different order of the letters.
Order of the letters. I'm like 70s boy band, Saturday Night Fever. So BGBGS. So for me, I don't have to check what your one is. So beans, greens, berries, grains and whole grains, and seeds and nuts and seeds.
Gotcha.
And so of the beans, whole grains and nuts and seeds, they tend to contain about 3 to 4 times more fiber than most fruits and vegetables.
Oh, wow.
So actually, when we're thinking about adding in fiber, if we can think about having the BGBGs, and particularly the whole grains, the beans and the nuts and seeds, they're just easy, simple add-ins that we can be really thinking about to kind of meet that 30 grams of fiber a day, or even just get an extra 5 grams. Like that 5 grams has so many more health benefits, or so many health benefits. So that could be having, a jar of, so I keep a jar of mixed nuts and seeds, by the kettle. So if I make a cup of tea, I can have that as a snack. I really like flaxseed and chia seeds because 2 tablespoons is about 5 grams of fibre. And you can easily add that. You know, I joked I kind of add that to my breakfast. You can sprinkle it on roasted vegetables. You can mix that in with so many things. Maybe you just want to put in your salad dressing. That's a really nice, easy add-in as well. And I think it's just having, again, it's like this variety of different foods that are just going to make your meal taste really delicious and be great for you and your gut as well.
Yeah, I completely agree. Ours is BBGs, but we don't do it from the perspective of fiber alone. It's more like just nutrient density. So beans, berries, greens, seeds, and nuts. That's it. So it's, you know, it's got a collection of fats and all those different plant chemicals and greens that are anti-inflammatory, and we should be getting more greens in, and that would negate the need for you to have to supplement with magnesium because it's got loads of magnesium in anyway. So yeah, ours is slightly different, but it's all the same. You mentioned a couple of ingredients there: avo, rye, dark chocolate, all favorites of mine. Flax, chia, pretty much have those every day. Some of the push that we get from recipes where we utilize these ingredients, particularly for those who are new to this game of looking after their gut health and increasing fiber, is the expense. What do you say to people who would rightly say, like, you know, I can't even find chia in my local store, or I've looked at the rye bread and it's like 3-4 times the price of the plain white farmhouse bread?
Yeah, so I think I totally hear you on that. And I think it's really important to always think about, you know, what's possible and what's achievable for an individual. And I think really berries are a really great place to start because actually you don't have to have them fresh. You can get the mixed ones from the frozen section. Beans are really affordable. You know, you get the canned ones. If you're not really a huge fan of beans, actually think about peas and edamame. Well, edamame a bit more expensive, but even just your humble, you know, garden pea is like great source, packed with fiber, packed with protein. You know, if you only buy the bulk pack of nuts and seeds, you know, peanuts, great. You know, just get that, you know, whatever's kind of on, if something's on sale, you know, try and stock things up. I'm a huge fan of also making things when I cook in bulk and then using that leftover, so that I'm minimizing food waste, because I think that's also a key thing, and then making sure you're keeping stuff in the freezer as much as possible. I have so many frozen fruits and vegetables in the freezer. It's like ridiculous, because it's great, like, and also like I don't want to be paying like for fresh, like, you know, when it's not in season and it's like twice the price. You know, I'll just put it in the microwave. So like cherries are my favorite. I'll just, you know, put it in the microwave or like cook it into something, you know, if it's like porridge in the morning. So there's lots of simple kind of, I guess, kind of less kind of fancy sounding foods that are packed with fiber. You know, it could be that you're getting pearl barley, which is, you know, a grain that maybe me being from Scotland, that's a very common one. You know,
I use pearl barley all the time. I love it. Yeah. It's got a lovely chew to it. It's like a real nutty flavor as well. Yeah,
it's something like, you know, growing up we'd be kind of putting into kind of broths and things. And you get the lentils, again, really affordable. You don't have to, like, I think a great thing about red lentils, you get the dry packs. You don't have to soak them or pre-cook them, and you just bung them in things. So if I'm making rice, for example, I'll put red lentils in the rice. So I think there's just so many affordable options that are out there. I think that hopefully can, and I talk a lot about price in the book as well. Yeah.
I think price is one of those areas where fiber can really win, because you don't need to spend a huge amount of money on supplements to increase your fiber intake, and actually the cheapest options in the supermarket are often the highest in fiber and the highest in nutrient density, and you're getting that collection of not just fiber but all the other chemicals that you find in whole, like grains and pearl barley and stuff. But pearl barley is literally one of my favorites. We make that all the time. With the menopause, a lot of people experience gut issues around this time. What's going on there? What are the reasons why the menopause can lead to gut issues, and how can we potentially mitigate against them?
Yeah, so when we're going through menopause, we have this fluctuation of estrogen and kind of our kind of female sex hormones. And these are actually kind of have this two-way relationship with our gut and our gut microbiome. So we tend to see that things perhaps are slowing down, things maybe you feel more bloated, can get quite kind of discomfort. And that's just all kind of natural changes that are happening during this period of time. We also see changes in your gut microbiome. And this is, I think, because there seems to be, this stronger relationship with estrogen than perhaps men have kind of with male sex hormones like testosterone. And kind of what's curious about this is that if we think about kind of female, microbiome from puberty, we see actually a shift in puberty, which we think is because this kind of estrogen is kind of starting to increase. That means that we have a kind of slightly different microbiome from men. Not to say that, one's better or one's worse, just like different.
It's not competition.
And then, that continues throughout life until we kind of get to menopause. And then with that, estrogen levels kind of again, kind of fluctuating and starting to kind of decrease, we see the microbiome becoming more similar to men again. But I think inherently, that people kind of get worried about, is the menopause ruining my gut microbiome?
Yeah.
But I think actually we just got to step back and think, just getting older in life, our microbiome does just become less diverse and a little bit less resilient. So we do want to be thinking about our gut microbiome, but perhaps it is just like a natural age-related kind of thing that's happening as well, not to kind of feel like, gosh, menopause is just kind of completely raining down on everything that's happening in my body, although perhaps for some people, of course, it may feel like that at the time. I think I feel very passionate that we just do not have enough research in this area. Like I feel just incredibly, I think angry is probably the right word, because we don't know enough about what's happening in women's bodies, women's health. And that has a knock-on effect in us being able to give advice on being able to manage symptoms. There's a particular lack of research around the impact of diet in menopause. We have some kind of evidence that shows that a group of soy-based foods that contain a plant compound called phytoestrogen, which is like a similar makeup to kind of our estrogen in our body. And for some people that can help to ease their hot flushes. But I think what's really interesting is that could be related to what gut microbiome you have.
Ah, interesting.
So there was research that have looked at kind of certain types of microbes, and having women who were in Japan tended to have kind of 40 to 60% of kind of microbes that kind of help to kind of process this and kind of bring estrogen back into the body, in comparison to in the US, which I think would be very similar to us in the West, in kind of in the UK, probably like 15 to 30%. Again, that's very kind of exploratory kind of hypothesis.
Sure.
But perhaps that's kind of an element why we're seeing for some people that having kind of a high intake of soy foods is helpful with their hot flushes, and perhaps not. So I think there's a lot of things going on that we need to explore. And I just really hope we get more research in this area, because
it's really interesting, isn't it? Because this one size fits all diet, and I'm aware, like when we talk and have these generic conversations, we are talking about essentially within that sort of frame of like one size fits all, like everyone should have more fiber, everyone should have more beans, etc., etc. But within these nuanced conversations, these studies actually shed a lot of light on how different we all are. So if I'm not mistaken, it's the equol producing microbes that are commonly found in a Japanese female population. And so if you're going to be consuming soy-based foods with those soy isoflavones, from tofu or edamame as an example, you're going to be reaping more benefits because you've essentially got the machinery to create the metabolites inbuilt in your gut, versus perhaps a European population that has less of those equol producing microbes. And a similar thing can be said of mushrooms, I think. So Japanese men who consume mushrooms have a more of an anti-cancer benefit compared to the mushrooms consumed in an American person's diet. It could be, again, because of the microbes that they have, could be the type of mushrooms that they have more exposure to, growing conditions, all these different things. But it's really interesting to see this sort of like patterns and how the differences are not, the similarities aren't always the same when you compare different populations. But it's interesting nonetheless. And you mentioned, a word, diversity, that gets banded around quite a bit as a descriptive term for a healthy microbial population. What do we mean by diversity? Why should we be aiming for a more diverse microbiome?
So it's when we talk about a diverse gut microbiome, a healthy one, it's really the best measure we have at the moment, but it's not a perfect measure. And I think in 3, 4, 5 years, I would be curious that we might have a different measure that maybe considers, a lot more other things that are going on. But what we're really looking for in terms of diversity is just thinking about having lots of different types of microbes. And that's, we talk a lot about, that being similar to a forest, and a forest thriving because it has shrubs and vines and kind of large trees and moss, and needing to have this rich different types of plants to be able to have this kind of thriving ecosystem. And it's kind of similar with our gut microbiome. We want kind of different microbes that can live together in relative harmony. We don't want one dictator coming out and saying, I'm dominating everyone. And, what's important also about that is that really it's not really about what microbes you have, the name of them. It's the job that they're doing. It's the molecules they're producing. And so many of them will have this range of different types of jobs, producing different molecules. So therefore you want to have, this variety. And the key thing within that as well is that having lots of different types means that your gut microbiome is also more resilient to a dictator coming from outside and saying, I'm going to have dominion over you. And that could be, basically getting, stomach bug maybe, and then that kind of harmful bacteria that perhaps you've caught from traveling abroad, then getting kind of rooted and causing issues. Whereas if your gut microbiome is diverse, they're able to kind of unite and fight back a bit easier.
Gotcha. So more diversity is better for protection against any dominant forces that could arise either externally from a pathogen or internally as well, like a species that becomes more dominant because of, I know you're feeding it the same sort of diet or an ultra processed diet. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. But I think what I kind of interesting about this diversity thing is that when we look at babies, the opposite is true.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So actually for, newborn babies, if they have like a high diverse kind of microbiome, that's not actually an ideal thing. We want them to have like low diversity.
Really?
Yeah. So this is why I think it's really interesting. And I think, that diversity piece, if we're going to get really technological about it, doesn't necessarily tell you about, what kind of molecules they're producing. And whereas this real shift to now looking at something called metabolomics, which is, we go back to that word, metabolites, metabolomics, which is effectively kind of looking at the molecules that are produced. So you might not actually see a shift in your gut microbiome. You might not see any change in, in the diversity or perhaps even the types, but you might see a change in what molecules they're producing, and that then having an effect for your health.
Can we just double click on the low diversity of kids, because that's or newborns, because that's kind of mind blowing for me. So why is low diversity better for newborns?
So I think really when we're thinking about newborns, they've got their kind of sole source of milk, and then they're also getting microbes from kind of contact with their parents.
Yeah.
So a lot of that, you see those microbes, even in kind of kids' guts at kind of 5 years old, we see, their father's microbes and their mother's microbes, or whoever the parent figures are, still kind of being present in that gut. And actually that can still last up until, they've seen studies up until 80 years old, of finding microbes that are still related to their mother's microbiome, probably their father's as well, but sadly we don't have enough studies that actually also include the fathers. So hopefully that's going to change. But to go back to that kind of early life, you haven't got lots of different food sources. you are just getting, the breast milk is a really rich source of kind of what's called a prebiotic, which feeds your kind of good gut bacteria. So you don't want to be having lots of other different things come up. And then we see that diversity start when that food gets introduced.
Okay.
So kind of that kind of 6 months mark. And then again, kind of when they're older. And I think also kind of bearing in mind, it's not just about the food, it's like crawling, picking things up, putting them in your mouth. All these different things are kind of also, because our microbes are all around us. They're in every surface we touch, they're everywhere.
Mm-hmm. And so, sorry, not to go too far down this rabbit hole. I'm not sure how far your research is in this area, but the diversity that we kind of want to see in adults, is that what we want to see reflected in kids' guts beyond 6 months or whenever they start weaning properly, to get like a diversity of different ingredients in their diet?
Yeah, so it really starts when the diet kind of starts, when the food starts kicking in. This is what we think. There still needs to be more research on this. And then it's really, we used to think it was 3 years old when you would then get what we call an adult-like microbiome. And that's effectively when there's kind of, there's huge kind of ups and downs of all the different, the microbes being introduced, when they're a young baby. And then that kind of settles down into a kind of more stable, more resilient gut microbiome. So we used to think that was 3. We now think it's probably actually more like 5 years old.
Oh, wow. Okay.
The key thing from that is like, actually, will we in the future be thinking about targeting the microbiome within that early window when it's still kind of more malleable? So I think that's going to be, again, a really interesting thing of like, how can we perhaps get someone off to like that best starter block, before it kind of settles down into this kind of adult-like signature that's more stable. And that, that, don't get me wrong, that more stable signature is more resilient to those dictators coming in, which is helpful, but it also means it's harder to then change it to a kind of healthier gut microbiome. Still possible, it's just kind of small, consistent changes, but it's just, giving you more room to play with, perhaps.
I love that.
Again, a theory.
Yeah. It's so interesting because just speaking for a mate here, getting our kids off to the best start possible is something that I'm kind of obsessing over at the moment. And I just want to make sure that I'm doing as much as I can in little Raphael's diet to improve the health of his microbes, so he has the best defenses early on in life against all the things that I know that we're coming up against in adulthood and early adulthood as well. So that diversity of the microbes, whether that's 3 or 5 as it marries up with an adult's pattern is really interesting. And I'd definitely be looking at the research, looking at how we can introduce diversity. I just know that what's going to happen, ironically, is he's probably going to be a fussy eater. And it's not going to allow me to get a diversity of foods into his diet. I
think parents get made to feel like so incredibly anxious about their children's health.
Oh yeah, I feel it.
Yeah. And I think that can, I kind of want to slightly alleviate that a bit, because actually, as you say, your child could be like, they're going to eat what they're going to eat, and you can have the best intention and perhaps it doesn't work out. But I think we've got to really step back and think about what other things are bringing kind of gut health into play. So we know that skin contact, the people that you live with in your home, you have a lot of microbes going back and forth. Spending time in, mud, in dirt. There's an adult study that looked at, giving people buckets of soil, and they dipped their hands in the soil before 2 meals of the day, and then I think before bed, and then just rinsed it off and then had their meal.
Just rinse, no antibac wash.
No antibac, no, yeah. And within 2 weeks they'd increased the diversity of their gut microbiome. So you think about the skin microbiome, that diversity, then that's, so we're, we really got to think about the environment we're in, spending time in nature, moving our body. There's so many different factors at play. And I think we can get overly stressed about how we support our gut microbiome, but so many things that we already inherently do.
Yeah.
Are positive health behaviors that support the gut microbiome without us even necessarily noticing it. And, even thinking about, the food that you eat, 1 apple contains 100 million microbes. Like, inside it and around it. So we're consuming, all these microbes, we're breathing them in. We're just, we're awash.
We're teeming with bugs. Talking about stress, a lot of people get very fixated about specific guides and rules around food. And one of them, I think that's got a lot of attention, is this idea of 30 plants a week, right? I think it's a noble sort of aim. I think more diversity in the diet is a good thing. What are your thoughts on 30 plants a week? Is that something that we should be rigidly going for?
So I think I quite like to try and talk about 30 plants in the context of how strong is the science behind it.
Okay.
And I think we know that having a diverse diet is really helpful. And I think for some people that 30 plants a week is a really helpful message. And that maybe it's a fun thing they can do for a week and kind of count the plants that they have. I actually personally find that there's also that other side, which is I've got to religiously note down every single plant that I've had this week. I can't have tomatoes today because I had them on Monday. This is really expensive because I've had to buy so many different vegetables, and I can't eat a whole thing of celery, and then therefore it's wastage at the end of the week. And really for me, I'm just so if we go back to what the science is, it was an analysis done within a very landmark study, looking at kind of citizen scientists in the US and in the UK who kind of gave their stool samples, the technical term that we use in research. They gave their poo. They donated their poo to research. And that's how we look at the gut microbiome. And then they kind of did a number of, completed a number of questionnaires. And actually this 30 plant week message comes from one small part of in this whole phenomenal paper they did. But actually it was just an association with a single guesstimated survey question. Oh. So there was no accounting for, okay, is it that how much counts as a plant point? Actually, is it the diversity, or are they just eating more plants overall? There's no thing about number 30 being magic. It was just the way that they split the groups. So they compared people who ate less than 10 plants a week, which, in the way that they were counting it, includes supermarket bread that has wheat in it and, maybe seeds. That was 3 plants. Okay. Their example was a can of soup, with that was like 3 plants, which is not what you hear in the kind of public sphere of how plant points are talked about. So very minimal plant intake, very minimal fruit and veg intake, versus someone who's having, quote unquote, 30 plants or more a day, effectively just saying we're comparing people
a week. Yeah.
compared against people who are having 30 different plants a week, mm-hmm. which, effectively just saying, could just be people who are actually eating plenty of fruits and vegetables.
Right.
So people eating plenty of fruits and vegetables have a more diverse microbiome compared to people who don't eat many plants. And so for me, I just find that the 30 plants a week message is getting talked about like it's the new fibre day, which is based on thousands of rigorous studies. Actually, let's just have a bit more nuance when we talk about it. And if it doesn't work for you, then don't worry. And if we can focus on actually the things that, diversity in an easy way, which is having a range of different colors on your plate, going to the supermarket and getting that mixed bags of veggies. I love those stir fry mixed bag of veggies. Going to the freezer section, getting those forests of fruits, getting fruits of the forest. Getting the kind of mixed cans of beans. Many ways that you can just make diversity really simple for yourself without necessarily having to be religiously writing everything down.
Okay. This is music to my ears, because I think I've been of the opinion that the plant point system, whilst it is helpful for certain people and it encourages a behavior that we want to make easier for folks, just by getting diversity into their diet, can turn to something that's a lot more rigid. But I don't think I was fully aware of the 30 plants a day message being based on an association. And so what I'm hearing is there isn't a randomized controlled trial where they've actually instigated a 30 plants a week strategy versus a lesser one or something that is naturally less than 30 plants, and seen a benefit to the microbes as shown by an actual investigation?
Yeah, so what the exciting news is, I know that colleagues at King's have just got this great grant that will be looking into this.
Okay.
Because what we really want to know is, is this kind of diversity without increasing the number of, fruits and vegetables that you're having? Like, how impactful is it, that diversity? And of course, it makes complete sense that we do want to be having all these different foods providing different nutrients.
Mm-hmm.
But, I think we want to also know, do we need to be aiming for something that's can be very stressful for people?
Mm-hmm.
Is the number 30 magic?
Mm-hmm.
Actually, could it just be something simple like, let's just think about the 5 color food groups, the 5 colors of fruits and vegetables, purple, red, green, orange, yellow, kind of white and brown, really just go back to what's simple and visual and not going to take up a lot of headspace and stress.
Yeah. I also think that the plant point system can be gamed quite easily. So if I just add like a sprinkle of, I don't know, some spices, or like a quarter of a banana in, maybe even a slice of banana, to be even more facetious about it, like I get an extra plant point. I think dose as well as diversity is very important, which is why, on the Doctor's Kitchen app, we do have plant points as a number, but we also have the amount of fiber that's in the ingredient. And we ensure that if we are using tomatoes, we're putting it in a significant dose or amount that's actually going to have a meaningful impact on not only the total amount of fiber that you consume, but also the other plant chemicals that are equally as beneficial. No,
I totally agree with that. And I think that sometimes when you see, again, it can be confusing when you see a recipe saying, this is kind of 18 plant points. And you think, okay, well, you don't need to have any other plants in the week. Yeah. But also I think, oh my God, I've got to buy all these ingredients and I've got to prep them. And I'm like, whoa. Yeah. So yeah, I think that's another thing, is I completely agree with you. It's a dose.
Cool. I've got a few sort of questions that we've collected from socials. So forgive me if we're going back and repeating a bit, but I think it's really interesting getting people's genuine questions from our community, because I think it speaks to the amount of information that they are privy to and what they're consuming. So it's kind of a question that we asked right at the start. Does eating one ultra-processed meal cancel out, and these are the exact words that folks are using, cancel out your good gut foods for the day?
No.
Okay.
Hard no.
Okay.
So your gut microbes they're very responsive. They're a living community living in your gut. And so, they're changing hour by hour, minute by minute, and responding to their environment, which is your gut, but also the food they eat. And I think this is where the kind of confusion comes. So your gut can change in rapidly, from the research studies, within as soon as kind of 3 days. But the thing is, you've still got that stability of your gut microbiome. So you're seeing, this something that seems, what is significant? It's like we're seeing like waves in an ocean, right? We can see the waves going up and down, but the core ocean is still there. So I think this is where like you're building that core ocean towards, consistent small changes day by day, but just having a meal or a day or even perhaps a week where you're not doing so great. Like actually it's about stepping back. If your gut microbiome, it's that consistent behavior across your kind of month, across the year, that are all building up and creating this picture of your health. And I think sometimes when we think about food like negating out, it can become very stressful. And I think we've really got to recognize, like I talk a lot in the book about our emotional relationship with food, and how, if we think we've eaten something quote unquote bad, we then have this like incredible stress response of, oh my God, I shouldn't have had that. I am so guilty. I'm terrible. It's like I've just shot someone or stolen, something from a bank. We really are very nasty to ourselves. And that is then having, that isn't just staying in our head. That is having stress on our body and stress on our gut. So I very much think about, like, let's not stress about the foods that are perhaps less nutritious. And also let's remember that foods are more than just the nutrients they contain. Could be that you are out having, a burger with lots of groups of friends to celebrate a birthday, or just like going to the cinema. But actually, if we can think about what the foods we need to add in, those are going to give us the nutrients that we need. They're great for your health. They're going to make you feel great. Naturally, some of those foods that are less nutritious perhaps will get displaced. But I think when we start cutting stuff out, that also can just, again, cause problems. And I think a great study that I really like to refer to is one on chocolate, because we all like chocolate.
Okay.
Where effectively they told one group of women that they weren't allowed to have any chocolate, which worst nightmare. And, after, a number of weeks, those women consistently had more food cravings. And when they did actually end up eating that chocolate, they ate twice as much.
Right.
And whenever I say that to friends, they're always like, of course.
Yeah.
We know this.
Yeah.
But sometimes we
Why
just
do we need to study to show this?
But still, we kind of think, I've got to just completely. And it's like, let's just pair that with, if you want to have that chocolate, pair it with some fruit, pair it with some nuts. Don't always have to. Have it at the end of your meal, just enjoy it.
So to reiterate, if you're going to be having a high fiber breakfast and you're doing all these gut friendly activities, including reducing your stress, walking, exercise, having your diversity of ingredients, and you want to enjoy a wagon wheel at the end of the day, or you still have a craving for a Tim Tam. I'm talking about myself here because my wife's family are from Sydney and they brought over some Tim Tams, and I knew they were in the cupboard and I just had to have.
They're like the Australian penguins.
Yeah, Australian penguins, exactly. Yeah, there was a horrific chocolate. It's not even that good. I just knew that they were there and I needed to eat them. I had a hankering for them. It's not going to negate my gut health or someone's gut health.
No, I think, we've got to recognize that, we aren't robots. We're human beings, and there is a big kind of picture to our health, and there's no such thing as a quote unquote perfect diet.
Yeah.
And actually that perfect diet is actually probably quite unhealthy, because, if we look at studies of associations with levels of anxiety.
Yes.
You see that this kind of relationship with anxiety tends to be lower, people having a kind of broadly healthy diet. But then you see this kind of sharp spike back up when you're kind of having more this kind of quote unquote kind of perfect diet. You're kind of becoming obsessive about every single thing that needs to be healthy. And I think, many of us have been in that spot. I definitely have been in that phase and for a big period of my life. And that was very kind of big shift for me and very informative for the book, actually, in writing the book. And kind of I went back and did a master's in dietetics and had completely changed my perspective of health. I wouldn't touch a sweet, wouldn't touch chocolate. I had green powders, juices galore, all these expensive supplements, and I felt exhausted. I felt rubbish. I was constantly kind of looking at the snack cupboard and then kind of guiltily kind of binging on something and then chucking the wrappers away. I think a lot of women go through that, and it might not, it's just something that, and I think men probably too as well, like increasingly, but I think it's something that, I think a lot of people relate to.
Do you think that feeling of lack of energy and feeling generally rubbish was down to underfeeding yourself or the stress? It's probably both, but which would you over-index on in terms of the contribution to that fatigue and those symptoms? I
think both. I think I was kind of thinking, I know better. Like I'm gonna, I was working as a private chef at the time. And I was like, no, I know what I should be having, because this is what I think. And I was not listening to my body. And so, I think it was a real combination of all these things. And I think really recognizing that mental backlash as well as being like really just, horrible, and not just, it's just so automatic and so normalized.
Yeah. I think this idea of ultra processed foods and things that are lacking in fiber and actually have additives and emulsifiers, etc., as being detrimental to your gut to cause leakiness is something that is quite a visceral sort of picture for people, and I can understand why people may succumb to this idea that even if you do all the right things, then you have something that is that negative and something that is getting a lot of attention in the press right now. It's going to have an impact on your gut. It's going to cause leakiness. I can sort of understand why people come to that conclusion. Maybe we should come back to this idea now of leaky gut and what we mean by leaky gut. Exactly, because it's something that I think is a term that is worrying for a lot of people.
Yeah, so I think what's difficult is this term has become almost like a syndrome or something that's been used a lot in wellness. And it's like, I have leaky gut syndrome. I have like, it's got a specific, issue, standalone issue on its own. And actually that's kind of been taken off from, that usually this is what happens. There's a nugget of science and then it kind of gets spun into something else.
Totally.
So what we really do see is that it's not about, and this is why I really try not to comment on newspaper when I get asked for comments about foods that are quote unquote bad for your gut health.
Okay.
Because it's actually about the broad picture of your diet. So if you are having a low fiber diet, a low kind of high ultra processed food diet, so like 70%, on that higher end, it's not about the individual foods. Then what we think, and this is kind of early science that we're really kind of seeing this. So lots of mice models and now kind of looking at kind of some kind of human signals as well, is that you've got a poor diet, and we know that's related with a poor gut microbiome and a kind of unhealthy kind of molecules that are produced from that. What we're also thinking is happening is that those microbes can also perhaps start feeding on what's called the mucus lining the layer of your gut. That's like this kind of protective kind of duvet lining your gut lining. And so if they're starting to kind of break away at that, that can then mean that there can be some kind of antagonization of the lining of the gut. And then you can have the gut cells can start to perhaps widen and things can perhaps start to kind of slip out. And we're thinking that this is why this is the relationship with the gut microbiome being an unhealthy one, being related to things like depression, other parts of your body being kind of less healthy, because this is kind of creating a kind of low grade inflammatory response.
Okay.
So again, kind of early science, but really kind of that's perhaps like the mechanism of what's happening. The thing is that you can also naturally get kind of this kind of leaky gut thing happening when you do exercise, like totally normal, and it will go back to kind of those junctions between your kind of gut cells will tighten up again. So it's not necessarily kind of problematic unless it's something that is happening consistently over time and is related to having a poor diet, and perhaps there's something else happening as well that is, it's a disease or condition that's like a symptom of what's happening.
Okay.
So that's really kind of the relationship.
So leaky gut, if we're going to use the sort of colloquial terminology that people are using online, is a real thing. So it does happen, and it's really about the excessive leakiness that causes issues. That could be a result of lack of fiber. It could be the result of something that is perfectly healthy, like exercise. Could it also be brought on by things like stress? Do we know, is there any research looking at how stress can cause an excessive, because the way I think about leaky gut or intestinal hyperpermeability is that you need your gut to be leaky because you want to absorb nutrients via that gut lining to go into your bloodstream. You don't want it to be too leaky such that you get the contents within the lumen of that intestine that can cause an immune response that is pro-inflammatory or excessive inflammatory. In your blood system that can set down a whole cascade of other issues. And so we want leakiness, but not too much and not for too long. Is that?
Yeah, exactly. It's similar to your blood-brain barrier in your brain, where you've got, little gateways that need to be letting the kind of helpful nutrients into your body, but also keeping the guys that are not meant to be there. So it's not necessarily that they're problematic in themselves, they're just trespassers. Yeah. Because that's also a thing. So I think this is going to be, really, really interesting space to explore more. But I think, it's natural to happen at various stages, as you say: stress, exercise, poor night's sleep.
Oh yeah. Do we have research on stress?
So in mice.
Oh, in mice.
Yeah.
Okay. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So this is what's so interesting with the gut microbiome. I think we've really got to recognize, like, 20 years of research.
Yeah.
We are still so at this starting point. I think there are, certain things that we do have kind of human trials on, but a lot of this, and like, we need to, mice studies are still incredibly useful.
Sure.
They just don't always translate to humans. And they do give us that, what we call the mechanism. So what is going on? We can dive in and say, okay, this and that we can't always so easily do in humans.
Yeah. And going back to what you were talking about with regards to the metabolome or metabolomics, are there commercially available tests at the moment that measure the metabolites of our microbes? Because it sounds to me that that's going to become a lot more important than just measuring what the population of microbes that there are.
And not that I know of. I'm not so up to speed with commercial tests, because I tend to not recommend gut microbiome tests, because I just don't think the science is there for us to give personalized advice from, or kind of advice that is actionable that you couldn't get from elsewhere. I do think that's going to be really interesting to see with that, because it'll be really interesting to see, have your levels of short chain fatty acids changed. So that's something, but I do think the whole field is going to start increasingly shifting more to that space. And that is something that we're very much doing in research that, my research at King's College London as well.
Are there drinks to help naturally look after my gut?
So I always think that, drinks are such an easy way of just adding in. So hydration for, like, start point, great for your gut, great for your gut microbes, keep everything going through. If you are having, if we think even just like I'm drinking some herbal tea right now, those contain what are called, polyphenols, which are those kind of plant compounds which give a lot of fruit and vegetables their color, and they're seen as a kind of potential probiotic, which is effectively, a compound that feeds a certain group of gut microbes to have a specific health effect. Drinking. So I love putting tea bags in cold or hot water so even anything, if it's not herbal, it's also kind of black tea have got a lot of polyphenols, green tea, a lot of polyphenols, coffee as well, really rich in these polyphenols. Fruit juice, actually, if you're having a small amount, also densely packed. So what we say is, like, anything that's kind of 150 mils is considered kind of, a nice little dosage. So that's, a great fun way to enjoy your drinks and look after your microbes.
What do you make of these sodas that are really popular in the States where they're adding prebiotics to them? Because they're doing phenomenally well commercially, but I'm always a little bit skeptical of the claims, personally.
Yeah, so they tend to contain about 2 to 3 grams in a can.
Okay.
Which, if you think that's contributing to your fibre intake in a way, and one way you could be like, well, maybe that's good. Which, nothing wrong with that. I think when it comes to the claims, when you're saying prebiotic fibre, you want to really be having anything kind of from, I think plus 5 grams towards kind of 10 grams.
Okay.
So whether it's actually kind of having that specific effect they're claiming for, I think most of the claims on products tend to not always be particularly legitimate, or kind of as but I think we've also got to recognize that there are multiple different types of fibers, and actually to get fiber from a food is far better, because you're getting lots of different types of fibers and lots of other nutrients and bioactives within that. And I think I always like to say, I'm like, food contains 26,000 kind of molecules, compounds in there for your, like, that have, that's how kind of complex it is. We talk about vitamin C and vitamin E, and actually, there's thousands, tens of thousands of things going on. Much I'm sure we will still discover. Again, nutrition science, 150 years ago, we discovered, A, D, EK vitamins. Not to say that we, don't know a lot in terms of nutrition, but I think, just to kind of put that in context.
Yeah, we need to come a long way, I think, and recognizing the thousands of other nutrients. And although they might not be essential for life, I think they're essential for thriving for sure. And even prevention of chronic long-term illnesses as a result of us living for longer. There's going to be a lot of troublesome ideas in this next question. So with that caveat, how long does it take to heal your gut? So this is a very common question that we get from people online about, okay, I've ruined my gut, whatever that means. I have lots of symptoms. How long will it take me to begin to input all of your advice to quote unquote heal my gut? How would you unpack that question?
Well, I actually wrote a whole review on this. So that was I think it was my first PhD review that got published was on there. It was like the duration of intervention needed for the gut microbiome. Based on the research we have out there, we don't actually know how long it would take for someone to completely, remodel and reshape their gut microbiome. And I think realistically, and I think we need more long-term studies to really kind of do that of interventions rather than just kind of a 3-month window. I think it really comes down to who that individual is, kind of what is their background health status, what age are they, what is their gut microbiome, what, because someone's microbiome might be different levels of, unhealthiness compared to someone else. What is their background diet that they're already having? What are the other health behaviors? But realistically, we're seeing, going back to that, we see these changes happening within kind of 3 days in terms of the research. So we are seeing significant changes within 3 days. But it's about small, consistent changes over time.
Okay.
So I think, realistically between, probably 1 month onwards, you're going to have noticeable differences to how you feel. And then, it's over time, consistently, how long that is going to be be dependent on you and as an individual and where you're at right now.
Okay. So it can be as quick as a few days to a month to see significant changes. And just to be clear, when you say significant changes, what are we talking about exactly? Like what is significance?
So significant, this is a thing with research. We see a lot of significance. I'm like, what's meaningful from significance? Yeah. So we're seeing enough of a change from what you had before in terms of either individual levels of certain microbes or that diversity of having a more diverse gut microbiome.
Okay.
But I would say within 3 days, you're seeing differences in levels of microbes. And then probably that diversity is, more of the month mark.
Okay. Well, this is where I believe the metabolomics would come in really useful here, right? Because you might see a difference in bacteria that is significant according to the current standards that you're using for a particular paper. But in reality, we're really interested in the metabolomics, the metabolites that they're producing.
So we've seen, studies looking at, vegans versus vegetarians, and kind of, and that their microbiome wasn't that different, but they, the metabolomics was actually what was the difference there. So I think, it's obviously you can be both and be incredibly healthy, but just to show that it doesn't always tell you everything by just looking at the microbiome.
Yeah, totally. Okay. Probiotics. You said right at the start that you're not a fan of probiotics. Are there any instances where you would say a probiotic is actually useful?
So I feel like I'm not a fan for probiotics being taken for general health and wellness.
Okay, like a multivitamin.
Without intention.
Okay. Right.
I think, if we go back to what I was saying about, an apple containing 100 microbes and, we have all these different things that we have going on. We don't know whether, that actually is doing a benefit for your health and your gut microbiome. And actually they're incredibly expensive. And actually that money could be better spent for your health on, if you want to focus on fibre, it could be getting those pre-cooked bags of whole grains, for example, or thinking just like, I'm actually just going to invest a little bit more on money-wise in what I can afford to spend on my diet. Maybe it's like just adding in another fruit or vegetable that you wouldn't normally have. Or just being like, actually, I'm going to have a really more like, one of those fancy tomatoes that taste delicious and like really enjoy making tomato salad.
Like Dutcherini tomatoes?
Yeah. Yeah, so good. But I think, the price of these probiotics, they're equivalent to a gym membership. That's how expensive they are. So yeah, for me, it's like, actually that money can be better spent for your health elsewhere.
If it's not a trade-off question, right? So let's say we're talking to an individual that has enough money to spend. They've got a PT, not just a gym membership. They've got all the best fruits and vegetables from Natura. We're not sponsored by Natura. I wish we were. They've got everything. Is probiotics still not a useful additive?
So I think until we kind of know, I think it so depends on what microbes are in there.
Sure.
So I think that's really key. But I think one study that I do want to mention that's quite interesting for this is like they looked at giving people probiotics after taking antibiotics. They took a week's course of antibiotics. And then the people who took an 11 strain probiotic actually had a slower recovery of their gut microbiome than the people who didn't. And that's likely because they're kind of getting in the way of your kind of usual microbes coming back. And they've already kind of dominated that space. And then there was some kind of healthy microbes that weren't being able to kind of restore and replenish.
That's so interesting.
So I think it really comes down to, this is an early field of research. We really want to have human trials on specific blends of these probiotics, of these strains of bacteria is what we call them, that show a consistent improvement, and then be like, okay, great. But there are within that, certain probiotics which have a specific health effect. So it could be something like stress. It could be something like helping with sleep. It could be for helping people with antibiotic-associated diarrhea. There are certain strains. So strains are like the full name of the probiotic bacteria. And so, like there's another Emily Leeming out there. We want to make sure that you've got the right one. And that has been shown to have an effect for that health thing that you're wanting to look for, that health effect, and in the dose as well.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing is that quite often, there might be a study for a specific type of probiotic strain, and that might be chucked in with lots of other strains, but that could actually change how it works.
Yeah.
So I think it's not just this catch-all. And interestingly, in the US, they did a study in Washington, DC. They did a survey of, I think it was about 93 products that were currently on the market and for probiotics. And they found that only 35% actually had the strains that were on the label that had, scientific evidence for the claims. So it's, it is a wild west out there.
Very murky.
I think it's a very exciting field. I just think, a lot of the labor is down to the consumer to have to make sure that it's just so hard to find the right one.
So if I was to simplify it for myself, you've got issues within the probiotic strains and whether there's the correct probiotics in the actual supplement or capsule or liquid that you're consuming. There's the interaction between them and what combination there is. And then there's also where you're putting them, i.e. what is the mixture of microbes that you're introducing that probiotic or that mixture of probiotics into, i.e. your microbiome. These are all things that are going to have an overall, these are all things that are going to dictate whether this is going to have a positive or negative or neutral effect on the individual. And so there's just it's so individualized. I can't see like how we're going to, especially with the way we do research right now with randomized controlled trials, I don't see a way in which we can actually prove probiotics are having a positive or negative impact, and whether an individual can deduce from those studies whether they should be taking one themselves.
I think what's going to be really interesting is, whether we'll then have, probiotics that are based on the bacteria that we have in our gut. And the reason I say this, if I go back to talking about that study where I talked about the antibiotics, taking antibiotics for a week, they also took a poo sample from the study participants before they took the antibiotics.
Okay.
And then kind of basically did a fecal microbiota transplant where you basically put the poo back into the person after the antibiotics. And they saw close to complete kind of normal, kind of springing back to the gut microbiome within 1 day.
Oh, wow.
And, and then complete resolvement within 8 days.
So they banked their poo.
Yeah.
put it into a milkshake, for want of a better word, and then put it back into them. Was it a crapsicule? Was it like a colonoscopy?
I think it was up.
I was up the bottom end. Okay,
I'm assuming
so it was a proper fecal microbial transplant. Okay, wow. Okay.
And yeah, so I mean, obviously, don't do this at home.
Sure, yeah.
But I think it just
we joke. There are people doing this. I don't know if you've seen it online. There's like how-to guides and stuff. Like, definitely don't do that.
Yeah, please don't, because there is a lot of risk for contamination, and it should definitely be done. There are. If under doctor approval, and for certain situations like ulcerative colitis, it can help to ease kind of symptoms, and also really important for C. difficile infection, which is 95% resolvement from fecal microbiota transplant. But I think that kind of just shows that it's about your own microbes that your body likes. Perhaps we'll have probiotics that crap seals, as you say. You can just take a pill that's personalized to you to help support that, or perhaps there's a missing one within that balance that we see is particularly beneficial for stress, and we can and we give that with the food source that goes with it, which I know we have kind of early kind of supplements that are looking at that. But I think if we can, the future in 10 years, have that really honed down, that would be really interesting.
Yeah. I mean, like right now, I think we're just sort of popping pills and hoping. And I like to be really data driven with anything I do, which is why I check my vitamin D levels pre and post having my vitamin D. And that's helped me titrate my vitamin D dose that I take every single day. Same thing for omega-3. I do an omega-3 index to make sure that I'm above 8%. And I titrate my fish oil or algae oil dose upwards to meet that criteria. So I'm not too low and I'm not too high. With probiotics, unless there is a way in which I can get a printout of what my metabolomics are saying, and then I start introducing a probiotic alongside my high fiber diet, and then I measure what the impact of that probiotic or that intervention is, I don't think I'm really going to start messing around with probiotics, because I just have no idea, other than the intuitive sense that this is doing me good. But even that is incredibly subjective because of the placebo effect. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, I do say to people, I'm like, if you really want to take a probiotic, I'm not going to, just, trach it for 8-10 weeks. But as you say, you're just relying on the factors, do I feel any difference? Which is very imperfect. Could be just placebo effect, as you say. But I think, that's what you can do. And I think it's one of those things also with probiotics, got to recognize that you probably do need to take it every single day, because they tend to be what are called kind of transient visitors. They're just rocking up, putting up their tent. They're not kind of staying, making themselves home in your gut. And then they're passing on through within 3 days. So they're still contributing to the orchestra of your microbiome, likely if they're having a health effect, but they're not just sticking around afterwards.
Is there any situation in which you would recommend a colonic for gut health?
No.
None whatsoever?
No, I think actually it's doing a bad thing. It's a problem.
It's a problem?
Yeah, you're it's interesting because I know people say, oh gosh, I feel, 10 pounds lighter. And, I think it seems perhaps, I'm giving a nice kind of, it's like going to the car wash or something.
Yeah.
But actually you're flushing out your gut microbiome. A colonic is basically you're flushing everything that's in the rectum and then the colon, which is the lower intestine, which is where your microbes live. So it's like giving them a tsunami of water. And they're then having to repopulate from that. And I think, there it isn't just a harmless procedure. There has been some surveys have shown that, there can be, discomfort. There can, and then to worse, it could be perforation of the bowel. There are things that, and potentially also more sluggishness of the gut afterwards that could then mean that, you're more likely to be constipated.
Yeah. I guess if you're flushing everything out, you don't know who's going to come back in, and you don't want an overpopulation of a pathogenic bacteria that can make things worse. So I think very much probably to the extreme of the probiotic area, this can be extremely problematic for people who are going into it blind, who've got no idea what their gut is like pre or post this intervention. So I'm of that opinion as well, but we still get questions about it. And people, to what you just said, they feel lighter, they feel better, they've got more energy. And so it's seen as like a way in which to improve one's health. But yeah, I mean, I've never come across any studies, actually. It's interesting. I'm just thinking about this on the fly now, of people who go for bowel prep before having colonoscopies, because that is where you take Fleet and quite very strong laxatives. So everything is flushed out. So you've got a lovely clean visualization of the gut when you're doing a telescope procedure. I wonder if there are any studies looking at that and the repopulation of the microbe pre and post, and whether it would be beneficial to bank your microbes and then have it afterwards.
Yeah, I think that's something worth considering. Because I think they do, that's an enema, right, when that happens.
Yeah.
It's like, so that's you're flushing out the rectum and the lower part of the bowel.
Mm-hmm.
So I think so you're not getting the colonic is like the full everything.
Oh, wow.
From what I understand. But yeah, I think if you could bank, maybe I think maybe that's going to be the future. We're going to be
banking our stool.
Or we just get some what are called super donors. You know,
oh yeah, tell us
primo.
about super donors.
Yeah, so the people who are researching fecal microbiota transplants at the moment are really wanting to know, are there certain groups of people that have super poos, basically.
Super poos.
Yeah. They've got, a really rich, diverse microbiome. They, obviously we also want them, they're physically healthy as well, because we've really got to think with fecal microbiota transplants about that connection with the microbiome and the rest of the body. So, we don't want to have any health conditions that could potentially all be related and tied back with the gut microbiome. So yeah, there's a certain group of people that seem to be, being used in these clinics. They're being kind of labeled as super donors, and they just seem to have this like phenomenal superpowered microbiome that perhaps they'll then make a lot of money making their super capsules, and making a kind of super donor.
Well, people never thought influencers online would be able to make a living, and I don't think it's far off to say people just going to the bathroom could potentially make a living in the future. They could be the production factory for the most evidence-based probiotics. That's fascinating. Okay, we're going to wrap up today's conversation with a couple of daily habits. You kind of sprinkled them in, and I think I just want to bring them all together so we can all have a look at them. So if you could suggest 3 or 4 daily habits that would make a significant difference to people's gut health, what would they be? And I'm sure there's a lot more in Genius, obviously, Genius Gut. But yeah.
So I'll probably start with the 3 Fs. So fluids, ferments, fibre.
Oh, lovely.
So yeah, so hydration, fermented foods, nice little add-in. And fiber being kind of the main primary focus. And then really thinking kind of more holistically from that. So stress management, movement, and sleep. And just really thinking how those kind of interplay. And I think really and again, going back to my kind of core philosophy, which is it's about adding things in.
Yeah.
Those kind of positive health behaviors that we can enjoy and have fun with without making rules and punishing ourselves and kind of being black and white about things.
Yeah. People struggle with sleep quite a bit. Do you have any sleep hacks?
So try not to eat in the last hour before bed. That's particularly is shown as being a problem. If you are a coffee drinker, really try and stop having coffee midday, because effectively that caffeine acts to block adenosine, which is your kind of sleepy hormone. Great if you're wanting to stay awake during the day, but actually the problem is that depending on how quickly or slowly you metabolize caffeine, that caffeine can stick around in your body from anywhere, depending on who you are, for 2 hours to 12 hours. So that could then end up being right when you're wanting to go to sleep. And a lot of people say, oh, I'm just going to have, an espresso after dinner.
I never understand that. I just... I don't know how it became a thing that we're being offered an espresso at the end of dinner, but I don't know how people can actually take up that offer.
But they think, and then I hear they say, oh, well, I fall asleep completely fine. And I say, but that's the thing. You can feel like you fall asleep fine, but actually your sleep quality
totally
is not as great.
Absolutely.
And then you wake up the next day. What do? You need to reach for the coffee again. So it's not to say necessarily that coffee in itself is problematic, but actually it's just thinking how you use it, because it is it's the original cognitive enhancer.
Yeah.
So yeah,
it's the best one in my mind. And also, you recently did a TED talk that's fab. You recorded it at the end of last year, but it's just come out now on YouTube. So folks can definitely have a watch of that. And you talk about these 3 benefits of fiber that I really love. Fiber is like an obstacle course for sugar, fiber stretching the gut and signaling satiety, and fiber and cholesterol. I wonder if you could quickly talk us through those 3 benefits, because I love the analogy, particularly the obstacle course one.
Yeah, I think it's that, I think fiber has had this really boring reputation of being like, it's this kind of stodgy mass that just helps you do a nice poo. And actually, I think it's being kind of unfairly maligned. And in the book, actually, I talk about it being a bit like Lois Lane, what she thinks of Clark Kent. She's like, he's not very attractive. He's just a bit boring and awkward. But actually, he's Superman, So I think we've got to give fiber a new lens. And I think, again, like thinking about the impact that fiber has beyond just supporting your gut microbes, and although that's obviously a great thing,
sure,
and your gut health. So it's helping to give you longer lasting energy, because it effectively acts like an obstacle course for sugar, slowing its release from your gut into your bloodstream. It's also going to help you stay fuller for longer, which is great. It effectively bulks up your gut and your stomach, which then stretches the muscles of your gut to then signal messages back to your brain that you're full and satisfied. And then it also looks after your heart health as well. So certain types of fibers do different things. And there's types of fiber that help to kind of soak up bad cholesterol in your gut. And so it's removed as poo, really helping to support your heart health. And that's one of the reasons why, eating lots of fiber is related to kind of lower risk of heart disease, type 2 diabetes, and many other issues.
Epic. Emily, you're awesome. Thank you so much. Really, really appreciate you sharing your wisdom. And I can't wait to see what the next research papers are like as well.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
If you want to learn about how to improve your gut health with simple tips, click this video right here. I've done a full video on how you can improve your gut health using food and lifestyle.